So in this video, we're going to talk about the most lamentable Roman tragedy of Titus Andronicus, more commonly just called Titus Andronicus, by William Shakespeare. Let me start by saying this play is nuts. This is far and away Shakespeare's goriest play. There are a number of murders, there's dismemberment, there's beheadings, there's rape, there's all kinds of crazy shit that goes on in this play. It is extremely bloody. Basically, I think the way to think of Titus Andronicus is... So it's a revenge tragedy, first off. In my interview with Colin Cox about Hamlet, we talked briefly about revenge tragedies. But Titus Andronicus is specifically a revenge tragedy in the vendetta vein. So this is not just one character seeks revenge for a wrong the way that Hamlet is. This is revenge going back and forth as the two sort of competing sides trade atrocities. Sort of, you might think of this, The Godfather is a revenge tragedy in the vendetta style, the original Godfather movie, The Godfather Part 1. So we've got that element. We've got so much gruesome violence that so you cross the Godfather with a slasher flick, a horror film of the sort of gore fest genre. And then it's just chock-a-block with classical references. So, The Godfather Part 1, Friday the 13th, and a university classics course, all sort of rolled into one, is sort of what you get with Titus Andronicus. So, as you can tell, it's nuts. It's a bizarre thrill ride of weird, gory, terrible fascination. So, basically, the setting of the play is ancient Rome, near the end of the empire. Titus Andronicus is the head of his family. He has served Rome as a great general for decades. Most of his, 21 of his 25 sons have died in battle. And he conquers the Goths, and he brings back the queen of the Goths with her sons, Queen Tamora, with her sons. The people of Rome want to make Titus emperor, but and this is the first thing that happens in the play, there's three competing factions. There's the people who want Titus, there's Saturninus, and there's Basanius. Saturninus and Basanius are the two sons of the previous emperor. And Titus Andronicus basically says Saturninus should be the emperor. He's the oldest son of the previous emperor, etc., etc. But the other thing that happens in the first scene that's really important. Actually, all of Act 1 is just one scene. Structurally, this is also a very odd play because there are a lot less scenes than there are in most of Shakespeare's other plays. So all of Act 1 is one scene, and I think all of Act 4 is just one scene. Anyway, so the other thing that happens in this first act that really sets the ball rolling is that Lucius, who is one of the sons of Titus Andronicus, wants to sacrifice Tamora's oldest son, Alarbus, in honor of all of the members of the Andronici family that have fallen in battle. So Lucius says, give us the proudest prisoner of the Goths, that we may hew his limbs, and on a pile, ad manes fratum, sacrifice his flesh before this earthly prison of their bones, that so the shadows be not unappeased, nor we dispersed with prodigies on earth. And Titus says, I give him you, the noblest that survives, the eldest son of this distressed queen. And then Tamara kneels, and she says, Stay, Roman brethren, gracious conqueror, victorious Titus, rue the tears I shed, a mother's tears and passion for her son. And if thy sons were ever dear to thee, O think my son to be as dear to me. Suffice it not that we are brought to Rome to beautify thy triumphs, and return captive to thee and to thy Roman yoke? But must my sons be slaughtered in the streets for valiant doings in their country's cause? Oh, if to fight for king and commonweal were piety in thine, it is in these. Andronicus, stain not thy tomb with blood. Wilt thou draw near the nature of the gods? Draw near them then in being merciful. Sweet mercy is nobility's true badge. Thrice noble Titus, spare my firstborn son. Long story short, Titus refuses to spare her son. And so his sons basically cut up her son off stage. We don't see this, but they cut up her son and burn his body as a sacrifice to honor their family members who have fallen in battle against the Goths. Tamara is not super pleased with this turn of events, and so she basically decides she's going to take revenge on Titus through a convoluted series of things. Basically, Saturninus wants to marry Lavinia, who's Titus's daughter. Lavinia is already betrothed to Basanius, so Basanius and Titus's sons basically take Lavinia away. Titus and Saturninus are not pleased with this, but then Saturninus is basically like, meh, I don't care anymore. I'm going to marry Tamara. Tamara convinces Saturninus to hold Titus responsible for his sons, preventing him from marrying Lavinia. Basically, this is the first phase of her revenge plan. So that happens. Then they all decide, some other pleasantries occur, and they all decide they're going to go hunting. The other person I need to introduce is Aaron, who is a Moor. He is Tamara's servant/lover. And he's an interesting character. He's a bit like Iago, except the play seems to not have that much interest in his motivations. He's just presented as evil without providing us with these explanations in the way that Iago does in Othello. But he's important. So they all decide to go hunting, as nobles did back in the day. Aaron basically sets the stage for Tamara and Basanius to have an altercation, and for Tamara's two remaining sons to show up and murder Basanius. They then take Lavinia, they drag her into the woods, they rape her, then they cut out her tongue and cut off her hands so that she can't tell anyone or write down who it is that attacked her. Then Aaron leads two of Titus's other sons to the spot where Basanius was murdered. Then they essentially fall into Basanius's grave, and then Saturninus shows up, having been led there by Tamara's other sons, Tamara's surviving sons. Saturninus sees Titus's sons with the dead body of Basanius. He pronounces them guilty of the murder, and basically sends them to be executed. Aaron then goes to Titus and says, if somebody in your household sends the emperor their hand, cuts off their hand and sends it to the emperor, he will spare your sons' lives. Titus cuts off his left hand and sends it with Aaron. Aaron, because he's evil, doesn't immediately go to Saturninus. He waits until after the executions have taken place, and then a messenger brings back the heads of the two sons and Titus's hand. Titus pretty much goes nuts and starts writing messages on weapons and on arrows, primarily messages to the gods, and just the members of his household just start randomly firing arrows out into the city with messages to the gods written on them. So shit's not going well. Then Titus sends his, I think at this point, sole surviving son, Lucius, out to the Goths, who are Rome's enemy that Titus had just finished subduing, to raise an army to come back and try and defeat Saturninus. While that's happening, Tamara and her... Well, so Saturninus is trying to sort of set up a parley with Titus and Lucius to, smooth things out. At some point, the people in Titus's household, Titus and his brother Marcus, learn that it was Tamara's sons who raped and mutilated Lavinia, and so Titus forms this plan. Now, what ends up happening in what's a really weird scene in Act 4. Act 5, Scene 2. We have this really weird scene where Tamara dresses up as the spirit of revenge, and her two sons dress up as rape and murder. And they go to Titus, and he's like, "Oh, you look a lot like the Empress and her two sons." And they're like, "No, we're revenge, rape, and murder." And they basically are like, "We'll help you get revenge on everybody who's wronged you." And Titus is like, "Great, that sounds fantastic. Why don't you, Revenge / Tamara, go get a head start on that, and I'll just hang out here with Rape and Murder." Who are in fact Tamara's sons, who Titus then kills, drains their blood, and we have this weird bit, this very uncomfortable bit, where he says, Come, Lavinia, look, thy foes are bound. Sirs, stop their mouths." So he's got a bunch of his servants and whatnot helping him kill these two guys. "Let them not speak to me, but let them hear what fearful words I utter. O villains, Chiron and Demetrius," that's the two sons, by the way, "here stands the spring whom you have stained with mud, this goodly summer with your winter mixed. You killed her husband, and for that vile fault 2 of her brothers were condemned to death. My hand cut off and made a merry jest. Both her sweet hands, her tongue, and that more dear than hands or tongues, her spotless chastity, inhuman traitors you constrained and forced. What would you say if I should let you speak? Villains, for shame! You could not beg for grace. Hark, wretches, how I mean to martyr you. His one hand yet is left to cut your throats, whiles that Lavinia between her stumps doth hold the basin that receives your guilty blood. You know your mother means to feast with me, and calls herself Revenge, and thinks me mad. Hark, villains, I will grind your bones to dust, and with your blood and it I'll make a paste, and of the paste a coffin I will rear. In the Renaissance period, the crust in which a pie was baked was called a coffin, so that's what he means, not like a casket. and make 2 pasties of your shameful heads, and bid that strumpet your unhallowed dam, like to the earth swallow her own increase. This is the feast that I have bid her to, and this the banquet she shall surfeit on. For worse than Philamel you used my daughter, and worse than Procne I will be revenged. And now prepare your throats. Lavinia, come, receive the blood, and when that they are dead, let me go grind their bones to powder small, and with this hateful liquor temper it, and in the paste their vile heads be baked. Come, come, be every one officious to make this banquet, which I wish may prove more stern and bloody than the centaur's feast. So Titus's plan is to kill Tamara's 2 sons, collect their blood, grind their bones up, make a pie using their bones and blood as the crust, and their bodies as the filling of this pie, and feed it to Tamara and Saturninus. Yeah, it's a bad scene. During the feast, Titus asks the emperor whether a father whose daughter has been raped should kill her. The emperor says yes, and so Titus stabs Lavinia. He then reveals that the delicious, delicious pie they've been eating is Tamara's kids, whereupon he stabs Tamara. Saturninus then stabs Titus. Then Lucius, Titus's, I think, sole surviving son, stabs Saturninus. And then basically everyone in Rome's like, hey, we know you literally just stabbed the emperor to death, but why don't you, Lucius, be the new emperor? And that's the resolution. Apparently stabbing the emperor to death is what gets you imperial status next. So, I mean, all of that is there, and we've got all this weird stuff going on. But one of the things that's really striking and bizarre to me is just how continually we get these classical references. So we get references to the Trojan War and Priam and all of these figures from the Trojan War. We get all these different mythological references, but there's 2 that are really dominant. One that's recurring and one that's more implicit. So the recurring element is references to the myth of Procne and Philomel, which makes a lot of sense because the rape of Lavinia is largely patterned on the rape of Philamel by Tereus in Greek and Roman mythology. And this is first introduced in Act 2, Scene 3 by Aaron when he says, "This is the day of doom for Basanius. His Philamel must lose her tongue today. Thy sons make pillage of her chastity and wash their hands in Basanius's blood." So it's clear that these characters are thinking about this in terms of this myth structure. And indeed, as we'll see in just a minute, Shakespeare is clearly drawing from this myth structure as well. A little bit later, in Act 2, Scene 3, Act 2, Scene 4, sorry. Marcus, after he finds Lavinia wandering in the woods, having been raped and mutilated, says, he has a long speech here, but I'm giving you just a couple of bits. He says, "But sure some Tereus has deflowered thee, and lest thou shouldst detect him cut thy tongue." And a little bit later he says, "Fair Philomel, why she but lost her tongue, and in a tedious sampler sowed her mind. But, lovely niece, that means is cut from thee. A craftier Tereus, cousin, thou hast met, and he has cut those pretty fingers off that could have better sewed than Philomel." So we've got the comparisons here. The other one that we get, so we have some references to Hecuba Hecuba of Troy, some references to Lucrece and Tarquin, which I think later than this, Shakespeare would actually write an extended poem, I think, called The Rape of Lucrece. So that's clearly an element here. But in Act 4, Scene 1, we have young Lucius, who's Lucius's son, proper Lucius, and young Lucius. You see how that works. Who was reading to Lavinia, and she starts freaking out. And they figure out that it was Ovid's Metamorphosis that she was trying to sort of use to communicate. Because again, and so here we have this overt reference to the Philomel and Procne story, which is recounted in Ovid's Metamorphosis. So we have that component of it. But the other mythological reference that we have here, when Titus feeds the two sons to Tamara, this is a reworking of the Atreus myth. So we've got two elements in the Atreus myth. Atreus's father, Tantalus, tried to test the god's divinity by feeding his son, by cooking his son up and feeding him to the gods to see if the gods would know that it was human flesh and refrain from eating. So we've got that element. But the more direct one is Atreus and Thyestes. Because there was, basically, long story short, Atreus and Thyestes were in competition for control of the kingdom, and Atreus kills Thyestes' children and cooks them up and feeds them to Thyestes in what's supposed to be a banquet where they're going to sort of discuss making peace. That's exactly what we have in Act 5 of Titus Andronicus. Titus kills Tamara's children, cooks them up, and feeds them to her in a banquet where they're supposed to sort of work out all their differences and things like this. So again, it's this incredibly brutal, bloody, violent play with these continual references to Greek and Roman mythology.